Hello coders, I'm Adam and this is Gosu Coders. Today we're going to be talking about the dreaded imposter syndrome. And yes, it is real. Let's get started. Imposter syndrome is something I truly believe every programmer experiences at one point or another in their career. It's something that may hold you back. It's that feeling like you're not good enough for a position or that you can't accomplish a certain goal. And if you know what I'm talking about, you're going to understand that feeling right away. Anyway, let's jump into the stories that I've got in my career. All right, my first story goes back to before I even started programming professionally. I had completed college. I got voted like computer science student of the year, great grades, felt like I knew what I was doing, but the minute that I applied for an internship or had an opportunity to go for a job, I didn't feel like I was ready. There was one particular job that opened up an internship that I was really interested in, but I just felt in my gut that I wasn't good enough for that company. So I ended up delaying it, and I ended up turning down an internship that got offered to me through a friend of mine because I didn't feel like I was ready. I dedicated 6 months of my life literally cramming everything in that I possibly could so that I would feel good enough to go apply for that internship. And to be honest with you, I never felt ready. That internship never felt like something that I was prepared for. After 6 months, I started needing money. I got to the point where I'm like, I gotta do something. So I ended up like sucking it up and I went for the internship, knocked it out of the park, ended up getting hired on. 4 or 5 years later, I was a senior programmer at that company. And I feel like if I would have just taken that step a little bit earlier, that 6 months earlier, my career would have advanced a lot quicker. Due to my fear and that imposter syndrome that I wasn't good enough, that held me back for a long time. So that's my first story. All right, so my second major thing that sticks out in my mind when I think about imposter syndrome goes back to that first job that I just talked about. My first, I call it my real job. I'd been there 4 years. I was a senior developer. The company was in a weird transition point where they were looking at potentially, downsizing, and I got to thinking to myself, 4 years, I've done a lot, I've shipped a lot of games at this point. It is time for me to go do something bigger and better. There's one company in particular that I really wanted to work for, and I ended up reaching out to that company. They sent me their take-home assessment, which was a ton of work. I mean, I'm talking essays that need to be written, code that needed to be done, and I busted my butt on that. I gave it back to the recruiter that I was working with. The feedback I got was that was one of the strongest assessments they had ever seen. So that got me feeling a little bit better. But the day of the interview, let me back up a little bit. The day before the interview, I needed to fly out. So I ended up flying out of the city that I lived in at the time. And across the board, flights were delayed. It was just a nightmare. It was absolutely a nightmare. And I ended up being delayed to the point where I didn't get to the town that this company was in until 1 in the morning. And my interview started at 7:30. And at that point, I don't know what came over me, but all of a sudden I just started feeling like I wasn't good enough. I wasn't going to be able to accomplish and prove that I was good enough to be at this company. And it was like my dream job at the time. So I stayed up all night, like just sweating, and I ended up getting physically sick to my stomach because I was so nervous and scared. 7:30 rolls around. I meet with the recruiter, try to like ease some of the anxiousness that I'm feeling and I don't know what I'm doing here, like I'm not good enough to be here feeling. And we have about a 15-minute talk on the ride over to the office. And the first thing that I do is I get put in a whiteboarding session. And those are incredibly stressful. And in hindsight, I look at how that went, and it had to be a catastrophe from the way the interviewers looked at me. But I had just kind of locked up at that point. I questioned everything in my mind. I knew, like, if I were to do this on a normal day, it would be a piece of cake. But given the situation of having no sleep, this feeling like I wasn't good enough, I ended up just absolutely bombing that part of the interview. And it's driven me to really help other programmers so they don't experience things like that. That interview taught me so many things, and ultimately I did not get that position. The other parts of the interview went really good. Like I've got along really great with the team members, but there were parts on the board where they asked me questions that I absolutely knew the answer to, and I just got thrown off my game. And one of the reasons I got thrown off my game was that feeling that I wasn't good enough. I go in there, the first question they asked me, I wasn't 100% confident in, and it was all downhill from there. It became more of like a riddle solving problem more than anything. And thinking back at it, and I remember sitting in the airport on the way back from that interview, solving that very problem like it was nothing. So I go from having like one of the strongest assessments that the recruiter has ever seen and the feedback that he's got on it to like absolutely bombing out the whiteboarding interview. And that was just a low for me. I didn't even want to talk to anyone. I had to go back home and tell my family that it didn't get the position, that I failed, and it was just absolutely catastrophic in my mind. And that just added to this feeling that I wasn't good enough. I wasn't good enough to be a programmer in some of these larger companies that I really wanted to work in and on products that I really wanted to work in. Today, I still have imposter syndrome creep in. I've got many of years programming at various companies. I've shipped multi-million-dollar products. I've built some very complex systems. And there are times where it still creeps into my thought process. Like I'm thinking like, how am I managing all of these engineers right now? How is it that I am good enough to do this? There's a problem that comes up. I don't know the answer to that. But what has really helped me more than anything is knowing that we're all human beings, and technology has become so complicated. You can't possibly know it all. You honestly cannot know everything there is to know about software engineering today. There are a million web browsers, there are a million platforms, there are a ton of languages, and you just can't know it all. So instead of me feeling like I had to know everything, I've gotten to the point now where I coach developers and I work with them to don't look at everything around you. Pick something that really interests you, get good at that. And what really helps, what really helps is knowing what company you want to work for, because then that can help target what it is that you should be learning and focusing on. So for me, imposter syndrome is managed very much by knowing that I honestly think people that are concerned about them not always presenting their best or being good enough are actually the most driven. Those are the developers that I think are going to push themselves to make it certain that they're going to succeed. And when I see someone that suffers from it at a high level, I take special care to work with them and help them understand the things that I personally went through, and how I overcome that is by knowing that you're human, that you can't be perfect, and being okay with saying you don't know something. And if you go in an interview and a company is not okay with you saying that you don't know something, I can promise you, you don't want to work for that company. You want to work in an environment where it's safe to learn, and it's safe to fail, and it's safe to not be perfect. So really, to me, if you go in there with that mindset and all you care about is getting better and learning yourself, but yet you're okay that you just can't know everything, you're going to succeed and you're going to get past imposter syndrome. Anyway, hopefully this has been helpful to all of you guys. Please give this a thumbs up and leave comments below about situations that you've dealt with as a programmer, or any profession, any career, where you just haven't felt good enough, where you had that imposter syndrome. All right, anyway, take care, everyone. Till next time, keep coding.